Good afternoon and welcome back to the Kenton Theatre. And in a world of new, we've got a new. We've actually got a guest in the room, which makes a difference. It's nice not having to talk to a screen for this actual event. So welcome, Jonny Kaldor from Pugpig. Before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. Please do ask questions. You'll see that your chat box and your Q&A is in the bottom right-hand corner. Also, please use the meeting hub. Go on and just make sure details are correct and update them if they're not. And do ask away throughout the presentation. Now, Jonny is doing a report on the state of the digital publishing market, which is the first of an annual report, which we're going to go through. There's lots of really gripping data in there and interesting feedback and analysis from the market. So, without further ado, because we've got a lot to get through, over to you, Jonny.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Okay, so yeah, as John said, there's quite a lot to get through here. So I might be fairly speedy, but do stop me if you've got any questions.
You can be speedy, that's fine. I will, don't worry.
Okay, so I'll just give it a bit of context. So this is our first year doing this report, and actually I'm going to share the approach with you. Can I just, actually, James, if you can allow me to, that's okay.
All worked so well a few minutes ago. No, we're not. There we go. There we go. We're fine.
Okay. I might have to. Yeah, that's working perfectly. Okay, great. So the approach we took is that we wanted to mix data and interviews. So a little bit of background about our company. Pugpig is a publishing platform. We power websites, digital editions, and mobile apps for a number of publishers across news media and consumer media. And so this is, as John said, the first of an annual report, and it's a mix of data from across our platform. So macro level data that we took across our whole stable of brands, just over 300 brands, splitting the data into news media or daily news media, weekly news media, and monthly consumer media. But then we're augmenting that with a set of interviews, face-to-face interviews, or at least as face-to-face as we can get right now, with senior execs, CEOs, head of technology, head of product, head of digital, from a whole range of publishers, mainly publishers who we work with, but not just. Again, split into news media and consumer media. And we're putting it all together. And actually, we'll be publishing the report sometime in October, but we thought it'd be quite cool to give you guys a sneak preview. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll be just pulling out some of the interesting things that we've seen so far. So I'm going to start with the data. This, I think, is probably unsurprising, but this is, again, looking across our daily news media apps primarily, our weekly media apps, and our monthly consumer media apps. And by weekly, we're talking about things like The Spectator, Newsweek, The Economist, and so on. Daily news media, I think, is probably self-explanatory, and monthly consumer media, primarily monthly magazines. And as you can see, a couple of interesting things going on here. First of all, and I've taken the numbers out, but at least you can see the trends. There's a general kind of growth trend over the course of the last 18 months, but in particular, and probably no surprise, a big COVID bump, which kicked off in February across all three. And just to be clear, this isn't a stacked chart. These lines are their own lines. And you can see for all three, there was a nice jump in February and March. What we don't know yet, because the data only takes us to August, is whether that little kind of drop-off is a summer drop-off and we're going to see that rise again, or whether that's just simply people have had the initial bump of COVID and they're getting back.
Have you got any take on why there's another bump, isn't there, look, earlier on in April? Have you got any rationale as to why that's? Because all three have gone down in that month as well.
Last April in 2019.
Oh, was that 2019? That's my eyesight, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, okay, sorry.
I'm not entirely sure what happened there, but there was a general trend up until that point.
Okay.
It'll be interesting to see the data from September and October, November to see exactly whether we're flattening out or not. One of the things that a number of the consumer magazine companies we work with did was to offer free editions over the summer, and that definitely had a big bump in downloads, and we're seeing that subscribers have stuck after that bump, so it seems like it was quite a good strategy. We're then looking at, as we look across daily news media, weekly media, and monthly consumer media, we wanted to get a sense of two things: session duration, and frequency. And in particular, so how often are people coming back to these apps on a monthly basis? And I think that probably, and this is the top left chart, probably unsurprising that people are coming back to the dailies far more often than the weeklies, and again, far more often than the monthlies. I think what's probably is quite surprising is the session durations. So we're seeing average session durations on our dailies of up to 25 minutes per day, or per session, sorry. The weeklies somewhat lower, and the consumer magazines lagging further behind. And I think there's a few things going on there. I think first of all, with the dailies, there's a lot of content in the dailies.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of them using puzzles, which are really good for engagement. I think on the monthlies, there's probably just a bit of work to do there. And we're seeing, certainly with the customers we're working with, we're spending a lot of time to try and get that engagement number up.
Yeah.
To me, it suggests that there's more work to do in the monthlies in terms of driving up engagement. And then we wanted to cut it a different way as well. So if you look at the bottom right, what we've got there is the same metrics, so frequency and session duration, but this time across two different types of app. So if you think about apps in particular, there are the digital editions. So you download the edition, you read it to cover to cover.
Yeah.
And then you've got the live apps, which are predominantly mobile, and they're the sort of thing that you can dip into, you know, over the course of the day. And most news media in particular have one of each of those. And what we're seeing here, again, I think quite surprisingly, is that the frequency of these live apps right now isn't that much. In fact, it's just slightly less than the edition apps. Now, I think instinctively you would imagine that the live apps people would be coming in multiple times a day, and we're not seeing that yet. You would. So again, I think there's some work to do there, and certainly, again, a lot of the work we're doing with our publishers is to try to drive up those live apps.
And this isn't really influenced by COVID, or I mean, this is a moving annual, right? Okay.
Yeah. So for these numbers, we've looked at the last quarter just so we've got the most up to date information. They trend a little bit, but we're more interested in the snapshot for this content.
Yeah. Or
for this data. And then the session duration, I think you would expect this again. So for the digital edition apps, you're getting longer session duration because there's more read, right? And the idea with a live app is you're dipping in and out. Then if we look at, actually these are industry stats, this one. So this came from a ComScore report, and I just want to put kind of mobile into context quickly. So this was as of, I think about 6 months ago. You've now got mobile and tablets overall accounting for 81% of online minutes, and 67% of online minutes are mobile. So this is where your audience is, right? So we should, when we're looking at numbers, we should be looking at heavy skews towards mobile. So we thought we'd look again at our data and see how that's reflected across our titles. So I guess the first thing to say is top left, which is share of sessions across devices for live apps, that's unsurprising, right? So 83% of our live apps are consumed on mobile. Yeah. Now, the fact that they're designed for mobile means that makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's interesting that people are even accessing them on tablet. Then if you look across at digital edition apps, again, this is unsurprising, although I would have thought in this case that mobile would be a greater proportion. So we're seeing about 50-50 between mobile and tablet.
Between the two, isn't there?
A huge difference, and you would expect that difference, I think. I think what's interesting for me here is, well, first of all, if you look at these numbers and then you take away PDF replicas, you start to see that mobile
is creeping up
when you take away PDF, because the content is far more easy to consume on mobile phone if it's native content. If you take, again, the same metric, but we're cutting this time across the daily news media, the weekly media, and the monthly consumer media. And again, if you're including the PDF replicas, what you see is for the daily news media, it's skewing just to mobile. With the weeklies, and I should clarify, with the weeklies, all of our weeklies use HTML, are all native content, so that they don't do PDF editions, which is why you see this much heavier skew towards mobile. And then with the monthly consumer media, who are traditionally more PDF-led, you see this 50-50 split. However, if you take the PDFs out again you see mobile being far more dominant. Now, I think where we need to get to is have that mobile number much, much bigger, because you can see that's where the audience is. So the opportunity here is, you know, growing the mobile audience, because that's where
I think I was saying to you earlier, I mean, I used to use my tablet every day, and I don't even know where it is now. And, you know, I'm quite surprised that tablet use is still quite so high.
Well, I think in particular for the monthly consumer magazines.
Rather than a fly attacking me.
Because they're far more visual, they do work a lot better on tablets.
Tablet, yeah.
If you know, you're going for the visual side of it. So I think, yeah, I think there's still work to do here again, as I said, for pushing, you know, more usage on mobile. Right. That's just a little snapshot of the data. We're going to have far more data as we publish in October. What I really want to get to is the interviews. So we've conducted so far about 30 of these interviews. They're 45-minute sessions. They're face-to-face chats. And we're really trying to just get a sense of how people are feeling about the industry right now, how they're feeling about the future, and what their priorities are. So we started with a simple question, which is, how optimistic are you about the future of your company? And all of these questions I've split between news media and consumer media, because I think there's some interesting comparisons to make. So I guess the good news is there's overwhelming optimism around the future of people's companies, which I think you would hope that was the case. Less so for the industry. And again, if you look at consumer media, I'd say slightly less optimistic about the future of consumer media and news media. The neutrals in the news media were predominantly around the regional and local press. But I think generally this is a positive picture. We then started to really dig in, and we wanted to get a sense of what are the challenges that you know, execs are facing right now, both across news and consumer magazines. So the question I asked here was, can you rank the following in terms of the challenges you're facing right now? So we were asking about subscriptions, acquisitions, increasing subscriptions retention, diversifying revenues, managing the decline of ad revenue, and managing the decline of news trade revenue. And as you can see, I suspect, unsurprisingly, subscriptions are at the top of the list. I think what's interesting here is that for news media, it's pretty much...
That's a challenge. You'd think that would be less of a challenge, and they'd be more challenged by the declining ad revenue, wouldn't you, in some ways? So they're saying that, am I reading the question wrong? And they're saying that's a challenge. It's a big challenge, the subs.
Well, I think it is the most important challenge.
Yeah, I see, yeah.
Now. And I think for news media, you can see that increasing subscriptions retention is ahead of growing subs because they're already, you know, quite a way down the path. Whereas with the consumer media, you know, it's much newer for them, the subscription business. So it's all about growth. It's all about acquiring new subscribers. And actually, I think there was a general consensus that decline of ad revenue and news trade revenue are happening. So let's focus on the stuff that's going to help us grow rather than focusing on the decline. And that's why they're sitting further down the list. And then we asked a question here, how confident do you feel that you're prepared as a business to meet these challenges? And again, as you can see, more optimism around news media than consumer magazines. And I think there was a general consensus of, look, we're ready in terms of like willingness. We know we need to do this, but there's some work we need to get through before we feel like we're fully prepared for these challenges. We then moved on and we talked about what are the big growth drivers for the next year? So kind of putting away the challenges, what are the things that are going to actually grow the business rather than just pure revenue? And again, unsurprisingly, subscriptions and memberships were number one, both for news media and consumer magazines. I think more interestingly is rather than ads and sponsorship and new markets, new products came up pretty much unanimously, as you can see, as the next most important thing, which I think, again, is really optimistic because it shows that innovation is really sitting at the heart of how people are thinking right now. We then asked a more general question, which is, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind right now? And what are you excited about right now? And I'm going to read some of these texts. I think each of them represents probably a collection of views. So subscriptions came up all the time. And clearly, you know, I'd say 80% of the conversations we had, subscriptions lay at the heart of the discussion. Retention is right at the top of almost everything I think about. That was a conversation we had yesterday. The one, and actually it's probably worth saying, we tried to avoid too much COVID conversation. We wanted to get a sense really about how people are feeling about their business in a broader sense rather than, you know, these specific months. But I think this one, shifting from a speed measured in years to one measured in months, was absolutely driven by what's happened over the last 6 months. That the business believes in subscriptions at last, that was a consumer magazine's conversation. And I really love I think that the correction that's happening, the move away from the race to the bottom in terms of programmatic advertising, And the move towards meaningful long-term relationships with our subscribers is long overdue, and that's exciting. And again, I think that echoes a lot of the sentiment, which is finally having a direct relationship with the consumer. And then the last one, laser focused, increasing scale, increasing product choice that we sell, and increasing active days amongst the members. If anyone can guess that one, I'll give them a prize. But I think that statement.
What was that I was writing? Increasing
scale, so growing the business, but also growing product choice that this company offers to consumers, and increasing active days, because active days, there's a very clear relationship between the amount of time consumers spend with the brand and the value that they bring. So these are three very clear metrics which one of the news media companies we're working with is following at the moment. So we then changed tack a little bit. We wanted to talk about the platforms. So we asked, do you believe that the big platforms are a force for good with respect to the publishing industry in particular? And as you can see, 3.7% of the interviewees said yes. Pretty much everyone else felt otherwise. And then the neutral is interesting, because the neutral was less, no, I don't really care either way. The neutral represented a conflict of, you know, a sentiment which was, they're really, really bad for the industry, but we absolutely need them, and they're providing, you know, they're providing a platform that enables us to survive right now. So it wasn't, yeah, I'm not really that bothered. It's, I'm really bothered, but both for good and for bad. And secondly, we asked whether they believed that government should be regulating the platforms. And actually, the only people who said neutral and disagree were people who just simply don't believe in regulation. And they actually said, if I believed in regulation, then I would say I agree or strongly agree. So I think that was pretty much unanimous that someone needs to control these companies.
That's not surprising at all, frankly. I mean, those are conversations that we're having all the time. On multiple levels, with you know, on whatever subject.
Well, and then so I think what's interesting is we continued the conversation. So when you at a high level, you know, the sense was fairly negative. But then when we started talking about how are your day-to-day relationships, so as a company, rate your relationship with each of the platforms from awful to great, or we have no relationship at all. And we basically we gave a couple of points for a great, a couple of negative points for an awful, and we added them all up, and this is where we ended up, which basically means, you know, the overall sentiment is we actually have pretty good working relationships. And in particular with Google and Apple was almost, well, yeah, I mean, you can see Apple, most people felt pretty good about the relationship they had with Apple. I think as you go down the list, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Snap, there was less of a relationship, but just we get good use out of the platform. And particularly TikTok and Snap, very little sentiment at all, really. It was more, we don't really care that much.
Well, that's because less of the ad revenue is being taken by them, isn't it? I think that's, you know, the big threat is the 9 out of 10 ad dollars are going to Google and Facebook, whereas less so to Instagram and TikTok and such.
I think also just relationships at the corporate level don't exist in the same way that they do with Google and Facebook and Apple. So there are more platforms that they use, but there isn't much of a dialogue between the companies. So then we asked 2 questions, and this is all around revenue. We wanted to get a sense of the scale of revenue across these different channels, and then a sense of the quality of revenue. So it's the same question asked in a slightly different way. So we started by asking to rank the total value to your business that each of these channels provide. So we've got subscribers and members on the web, subscribers and members in your app, both regardless of where they subscribed, people accessing the free website directly, the free website through SEO, through social, and then people interacting with content on third-party free platforms like Facebook and YouTube, and finally third-party paid platforms like Apple News Plus and Zinio and so on. And as you can see, I guess this is unsurprising, right? So subscribers and members on the web, unanimously #1 across both groups, and then either the website direct or the website via SEO. And apps coming in normally about third or fourth place. When, however, you then move to the value per user, So this is, just to be clear, this takes away the scale part of the question. So this is if you have one user, to, you know, how would you rank the value of that user across these different platforms? So subscribers and members on the web and in the app, depending on the publisher, those two swapped. So there was some sense that when they're on the website, I can interact with them more, but when they're on the app, they tend to be more engaged and they spend longer. So they've kind of vied for first and second place across most of the publishers. And then the free web very clearly sits in third place. And interestingly, actually, for most of the people we spoke to, the paid platforms were having less of an impact than we expected them to. So next, we deep dive. It's a similar sort of question, but we're looking across delivery channels. And in this case, we actually asked for we asked 4 different questions. What we're trying to get a sense of here across print, web, app, email newsletters, events, podcasts, e-commerce, OTT video, including like YouTube channels, but also Apple TV or Roku and Chromecast and so on, and smart speaker skills. We're trying to get a sense of, number one, the spend, and then secondly, what audience you get from that spend, and then what revenue you get from that audience, and then finally, how would you rank these strategically for the future? So that's how this kind of breaks out now. So as you can see, when you talk about spend, I think it's pretty clear that print is number one. It's interesting that print is the number one on consumer media. And I think that's a little bit skewed by the fact that we had a couple of digital only publishers in there. Because I think by and large, you know, most conversations we had, print was ahead of web.
Yeah.
You then see either the app or events in third place and then the rest follow behind. If you then switch to audience, which is the second question, again, probably no surprise here, the web is way and ahead the number one. I think web was number one for pretty much every single publisher, apart from a couple of the digital only ones who the app actually acts as their primary delivery mode. So you've got web as the largest audience, followed by print, and then again, depending on the publisher, either app next or email newsletters. If then we move on to revenue, again, you see this start to change. So at this point, and again, this is total revenue, you see the website just in front and print just behind it. And then there's quite a marked difference between news media and consumer magazines, where with the news media, the app is in pretty close third place, followed by events. And by the way, just to be clear, so with events, again, we kind of wanted to rule out the COVID factor.
Yeah, so
here.
what was it like before, sort of thing?
So we talked about events in general rather than events right now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but you can see events far more important for consumer media and the app kind of trailing behind, but where with news media, I think the app has far more prominence. And again, that's reflected if you look at then the strategy. So how do you rank these things strategically? Again, a big difference between news media and consumer media. So with news media, the app and website, again, depending on the publisher, vied for first and second place. And as you can see, overall, the app just kind of snuck in front, with print in third place, and then email, newsletters, and events kind of following behind. Things like smart speakers, actually OTT video seemed to be pretty low on most people's lists for most of these questions. And then with consumer media, website way out in front, with print actually ahead of apps in this case. So I think it felt like print, even though they look, if you look at print between consumer media and news media, they look kind of in a similar place. Actually, as far as the polling is concerned, print turned out to be more important for consumer media than for news media. You can see print actually sits in second place in consumer media. So, and we're going to continue digging into this, by the way, because there's clearly a lot to kind of eke out of this. Then we changed tack again, and we wanted to get a sense of product and the flow of content. So these are less kind of around revenue and audience and more around just kind of how people look at content and look at their products. And so we started with an interview that I'm guessing everybody listening to this has read this interview, which was the exit interview that Mark Thompson did with McKinsey. And in it, he talked about, you know, how when he was at the New York Times, he forced a shift from a flow of content which went from print to website to app. he switched it round from mobile as the originating platform to web to print. So that kind of provided the context of this question, which was, how does it work in your organization? And I think starting with consumer media, I think pretty much everybody followed the traditional route, or continues to follow the traditional route right now. So this wasn't how do you think it should be done, it was how are you doing it right now, which is print is still primary, website comes next, the app follows, in terms of how the content flows, not necessarily in terms of the strategic importance as we've just seen. With the news media, I think it was interesting, and you can see here that there was far more of a back and forth between print and website. So quite a few of the news media people we spoke to put web first and then print. Quite a few actually don't really differentiate between the two. They just said they kind of work together. And I think we're going to see that changing in the consumer media in the coming years. So we then, because we do a lot with apps, so we asked some appy questions. So we wanted to get a sense of what apps people have. Now, as I explained before, there are kind of a few obvious types of apps. I mean, there are a million types of apps. So for publishers, there tends to be a digital edition. There's a live content app, and quite often people have a kind of universal app, like a Swiss Army knife app, which does everything.
Yeah.
So we wanted to get a sense of what sort of apps
Swiss Army knife, I like that.
Yeah, well, I think it characterizes it quite well, actually, in every sense. So I think, again, with the news media, what you can see is a lot, and I think this is quite common, a lot of news media companies actually like both. So they like to have a digital edition for not necessarily their more traditional audience, but for people who really do want to have a cover-to-cover read, but they also like the idea of a live content app which people can dip in and out of throughout the day. And actually, a number of publishers have all three. They have some digital editions, and they have live content apps, and they have a universal app. The Economist is a good example, actually. Consumer media, I think have got into the space a little bit later, and so they're still finding their way in the kind of app economy. So a lot of it is based on digital editions, because 10 years ago, if you had a magazine, you had to have a digital edition. It was just something you needed to do. But then there wasn't a lot more development around the principle of apps and how do you engage subscribers. But what we're seeing now, and certainly from our perspective, we're actively working on projects now where we're starting to build these live content apps for consumer media publishers, because as you saw a bunch of slides back, they need to increase the level of engagement on a monthly basis. So they need to have more conversations with their readers. And then we are, okay, setting aside what you do right now, what do you think is the best strategy? Should you have one universal app that does everything, jack of all trades, a Swiss Army knife? Or should you have specific apps for specific audiences? Because different people want different things. And actually, I was quite surprised by this, but a slightly larger number think that the small number of dedicated apps for particular audiences is the right way to go. I think instinctively, when you first think about this, you think, well, it should be one app, right? Because it's one listing in the App Store. There's no confusion for consumers. It's far easier for them to find it. You only have to download one thing, which all of that logic makes sense. But I think actually, when you really think about it, if you want to keep things very simple for users and you don't want to clutter.
Just gives them what they want.
It just gives them what they want. So that's why I think
more apps, that's good news for you.
Well, yeah, obviously, but I genuinely think there is, and we talk to our publishers all the time about this question, because obviously for us, we need to get from our platform perspective the right direction as to whether we do kind of universal apps at the moment, but how much emphasis should we put on building a one true universal app platform? And what we're hearing is, yes, there is real demand for it, but it's not the only way people.
It's not the only way, sure.
So we then wanted to get some feedback on iOS 14. So you probably know Apple are launching their new operating system. They do it every year. iOS 14 has a bunch of features which are interesting to publishers. I guess one of the big ones I didn't put in here, which I should have done, which is the whole kind of ad tracking thing, because we tend to focus less on the ad economy and more on the content economy and reader revenue. So we didn't ask that question, which we probably should have done, and I might go back and ask that question. But what we wanted to do was get a sense of the relative importance or impact of these different features. So you've got in-app renewal management, which is basically, rather than just renewals happening automatically in the background through the App Store, the app actually itself will have in-app message saying your subscription is up for renewal, giving certain options and so on, which is potentially a threat and potentially a benefit, because it's making people more aware that they're renewing. So that's one. The second is the Apple News or Apple News Plus actually link hijacking. So if you're on a phone and you search for some content and the publisher has that content, not just on the website, but in Apple News Plus, the operating system will send people straight to Apple News Plus.
Yeah, that is a threat.
Clearly controversial.
Yeah, clearly.
Family sharing of purchases, home screen widgets. So Android phones have done this for many years. So on the home screen of your Apple device, rather than just having a little app icon, you can actually have a widget which has content surfaced in it, which is pretty cool. We're doing something with Tortoise on that right now, actually. So you actually have, you know, your content right there in people's faces. They don't have to open the app to see it. So that could be really interesting. And then last of all, iOS apps running on the desktop. And that's going to happen as the new chips are released, the new chipsets and the new Apple hardware. And so, yeah, so this is how everybody voted. In-app renewal management is the most important. Apple News, link hijacking, clearly, I think this was interesting because for those that it affected, it was the #1, but there are certain publishers who aren't on Apple News or Apple News Plus, so they were less concerned about
That's a big debate, actually, isn't it? That's a big, difficult decision to make because it's because it's a big threat. And it's a big opportunity at the same time. So it's, you know,
well, I mean, it's
like going on a digital newsstand, isn't it? It's sort of, it's a similar sort of conversation because you're losing a sub, but you're gaining some revenue.
Yeah, I think, I mean,
or potentially losing a sub.
Out of the conversations we had, one publisher in particular is very happy with their relationship with Apple News and Apple News Plus. I'd say most who are using it are either, well, are somewhat disappointed, I guess, in the results that they're bringing. But yeah, I probably shouldn't be digging into that too much.
Yeah, no, okay.
The one interesting one for me was this iOS apps running on Mac OS, and I think from our perspective as a company, we can't quite decide whether that's game changing or completely irrelevant. And actually, for the vast majority of people we discussed this with over the course of the last few weeks, there was a sense that, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. Apart from someone yesterday said apps on the desktop will change the way we think of apps. And I thought, yeah, I think you might be right. It's one of those things that until it's there and we're doing it, we can't really guess whether it's going to be revolutionary or just no one's ever going to bother. So that it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for it. Okay,
Sorry,
so
our clicker's broken.
a little bit stuck. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Thanks, James. So then we wanted to get a sense of how publishers look at product development and what are the big forces that drive or influence how they develop products. So this is, again, all of these are ranked lists. What you see here in news media is that analytics, well, this is the good news, right? Analytics clearly across both are the #1 driver of product development. User feedback is second or third, along with user testing. I think what's interesting and not surprising is that in news media, the editor is far more influential than in consumer media. And actually,
What do you think about that?
well, I think it's absolutely the case. And I think what
Do you think it should be? Is my question.
yeah.
I mean, shouldn't the analytics tell you what's going on, not what one person thinks? Or
Yeah, but I mean, when you look at a news media company, there is a culture there where you know, since the beginning, the editor is the product owner, and is, you know, has godlike stature. And I think what this belies actually is that there were a number of people where the editor was the #1. And that's been balanced by people who push the editor further down the line.
were you asking the editors though?
No, but you know, we were talking to pretty senior people, and I think, you know, it's partly absolutely right, and it's also partly completely wrong. I mean, it depends how you look at it.
Yeah.
I think in consumer media, it was interesting that it really does feel like the editor plays quite a different role. I mean, obviously it depends on the size of the publication, but that's certainly the gist that we were getting.
It's interesting there that user testing is used much more heavily in consumer media than it is in news media.
Yes.
Why is that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know whether that's just relative because the influence of the editor is so much less because these are all ranked, right, rather than absolute numbers. So I think, yeah, the relative lack of importance in consumer media of the editor kind of pushed up the
yeah, that would make sense.
So James, oh yeah, no, that worked. Okay, right, this needs a little bit of a backstory. So have I got, how are we doing for time? Yeah.
We're okay.
There we go. So many years ago, I think this was 2009. Yeah, 2009. When I and actually John, my co-founder, were at the News Corp.
Yeah.
There was a conference in Carmel, and there were, as part of the conference, there were 2 evening events. The first evening, James Murdoch interviewed Larry Page, and on the second evening, he interviewed Steve Jobs. And it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And halfway through the Steve Jobs interview, James Murdoch said, "So, Steve, to what extent do you believe that a successful media business today really should be a technology business?" And we were all kind of nodding, waiting for the love, right? And he turned around and said, "Absolutely not. You are a content business. I'm a technology business. Any decent technology person is going to work for me or for Facebook or for Larry. So don't even try." Yeah. And it was, I mean, being a technology person in a media company was pretty demoralizing, I have to say.
This is the buy or build, basically.
Well, it comes on to that. Yeah. Well, but actually, it's a little bit more than that, because really what he was getting at, and what we're trying to get at in this question, is not should a media business be good at tech, because of course they should be. Yeah. And they should be good at integrating tech and understanding tech and knowing how to exploit technology.
But not building it.
But should they be building core original IP? And what's brilliant about this question, and also really interesting to me, is, as you can see, it's extremely polarizing. A couple of people in the news media are neutral, but apart from that, everybody had an opinion. And it's completely split, almost down the middle. So, and again, to me, it's unsurprising that news media even more strongly agree than consumer media. But, there were literally conversations where the person we were talking to was adamant, absolutely they should be. And 10 minutes later or an hour later, we'd have a conversation with someone else and they say, absolutely, we shouldn't be. So I don't know what to take from that, apart from people have strong opinions.
And were they companies, so the people that were totally for it, were they people that were about to build tech, or they had already built it successfully, and conversely, were the people that said absolutely not, possibly people that have gone down that road and not got it right? Or did you not delve that
We didn't delve that deep. I mean, one thing I will say is, and this is more anecdotal and we'll maybe dig into the data a little bit here, but anecdotally, normally we tend to see the tier 1 publishers more inclined to build their own technology.
Just generally because of scale, effectively.
Yeah, but that said, we are working with a number of tier 1 publishers who absolutely are of the mind that they shouldn't be. Technology companies are working with us.
But if I think across our board, we've got a pretty mixed bag, without sort of naming names. I can identify companies that definitely sit in the we buy tech, we don't build it, and other people that absolutely want to build it. So it is very polarizing. There's very few people that sit on the fence on that subject.
Yeah. Well, actually, and so and to that point, actually, sorry guys, just as you came to camera, going back to the slide. Oh, can we go back one? There we go. So we also asked, who does does your most senior technology person, let's say, for example, your CTO, sit on the exec? And again, interesting that just over half do. And we're going to dig into this because I'd like to understand the relationship between the people who believe they're a tech company and the people who have CTOs sitting on the board, and see if there's a clear correlation between those. Okay. You would hope there would be. But then to the question you were just asking, actually, if we go to the next slide. So then we asked, okay, So should you buy or build technology? And actually, that's the point where it's pretty clear, right? 85% of the respondents said, no, you shouldn't. They were either neutral or they were quite specific about, no, you shouldn't be building core technology.
Because we're a media company, we're not a tech company. Yeah.
So there's something going on between those questions, but I thought it was quite an interesting little set of questions. Okay, so this is the last thing we asked. There were a bunch of other questions, but I just kind of brought out a few that I thought were interesting. So the last thing we asked was, okay, if you could snap your fingers and magically change anything right now about the industry, what would you do? And this is a selection of the answers that we got. I think, and again, it's a representative sample. So the platforms like Facebook would promote trusted content over misinformation and fake content. We heard that a few times, and I think that's a really good one. I think the one in the middle is really interesting and also really scary, but the idea of creating a single global digital identity for consumers. This isn't just the publishing thing, this is a global thing.
Yeah.
Which on the one hand is scary from a kind of privacy perspective, but it's really interesting from a security perspective and also from a friction-free commerce perspective. I really liked I'd go back 10 years and stop the pursuit of scale for the sake of scale and help consumers understand the true value of high quality journalism, which I think maybe have to go back 20 years rather than 10 years to do that.
That sounds like a bitter journalist.
But I thought that was a good one. I think reducing the dominance of the big platforms came up time and time again. Right. Making everything truly mobile first was interesting because I think it's something that everyone thinks they're doing, but as this person said, they're not.
Well, it's interesting when you were talking about that, you know, it's written for print first and then for web and then for mobile. Yeah. And that actually in the modern world doesn't make any sense because, you know, if you think about behavior, you look at your mobile and much more, and then you might buy something and read the synopsis or you know, the interpretation of the news and things. So I think that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and also given the stats that we brought out earlier, you know, that more than 80% of time spent is on mobile.
Yeah.
Building a better monetization model for local publishers, giving them a chance to survive. There was quite a lot of sentiment around local and regional press. And the last, actually the bottom right was from a regional press conversation, improving the quality of the product and content that we publish because we've been focusing too much on cost cutting in the recent past. Every paper should be the best that we can produce every time. I thought that was a really nice sentiment and really sincerely held. So there you go. So that's just, like I said, we're still halfway through this. We've got a little bit more analysis to do before we're ready to publish
stop
this.
Sharing now, James.
But yeah, hopefully that's of some use.
Yeah, very much so. So I've got a few. We are getting quite tight for time now, but that was really, really interesting. And actually, all it did was ask a whole load more questions, really, in terms of understanding what that. It's the next question down. So the first thing is, you said you were going to be publishing in October. Is that a hard date? You'll definitely be ready by then. And how do people get hold of a copy?
Yes, I think we will. It'll definitely be at some point in October. That gives me a nice 4 week.
That gives you a nice 4 week gap. Yeah.
It'll be. I think primarily it'll be available. We'll probably stick it up on LinkedIn, and it'll be available on the website and so on, so people can just come and we'll certainly make a bit of a song and dance about it, and then people will just be able to download it.
And the other thing that I just wanted to go back to was the iOS on Mac, and you sort of touched on that and said, does it not matter, or is it a game changer? So I'm just trying to think it through. How would it be a game changer? What was the sentiment behind that question?
Well, so the way from a kind of app publishing perspective, it's quite a simple concept. When you submit an app to the App Store right now, it's for a tablet and a phone, and in the future it'll.
So on a user, you'd be sat at work and you go, actually, do you know what? I'm just going to look on my boot. You just. Is it saying it would detract from mobile because you would?
No, I don't think so. No, but I think we very clearly differentiate between a desktop experience and a mobile experience at the moment. Having an app store on the desktop, which there kind of is right now anyway, but having it more like the kind of the iOS app store and being able to download, I don't know, what's a digital edition going to look like in a native app on the desktop versus what we have right now, which is a kind of web version of that. Again, it's hard to know whether it's going to be significant or people just won't.
I'm gonna just rattle through a couple of other questions because we are just 2 sessions that have actually gone the whole full distance. So I've got one here from Esther Thorpe that says, do you think the habits people are forming around reading this way will stick in the longer term, or if we get back to normal?
Okay, so this is a COVID question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
So
And
it's
it's
back
so
to the
hard
first
to
slide,
see.
really. It's back to,
Yeah, it's hard to see because we've definitely seen, I'd love to see another month's data and answer that, because we've definitely seen a little bit of a drop off. And this is definitely a gap in my understanding. I don't know the typical summer behavior for consumer magazines and news media, whether there's just a natural drop off for holidays or whether there's a pickup. So I don't know about that. Because that could account for the little drop off.
I think it's like our subs report. You know, you do the first one, you can't really get a trend until you've done more than one, because you don't know where you're starting.
Well, also, I think I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this will know what happens in summers generally. I think there will definitely be a bump and there'll be definitely some drop off, because there were promotions that were going on throughout COVID, which are you just can't continue definitely, like access to magazines, free access to magazines for a month or two. So but what we're seeing at least is there was an initial bump of activity in the apps, and there were subscriptions as a result of that. So at the very least, it was an effective exercise in gaining subscribers. It'll be interesting to see how long it lasts.
Jonny, I'd love to talk longer. We could talk all day, but we are out of time now. If you want to go more further or get in contact with Jonny, you can come through to info@fipp.com, and also as well, if you would like a copy of the report, which I expect will be very popular, we will certainly be marketing that through our social and digital channels at a time when it comes out sometime in October. Cool. Thank you very, very much for your time. That's really great insight into the way people are thinking. And it's nice to have somebody. We're allowed to do that here. It's nice to actually have a human in the studio. But we are out of time. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.